Socialist, number 14th. My name is Emberly McCullough, and I'm going to be your host today. We're going to be talking about Juneteenth. Let's put some background music on for our Juneteenth. Screen share. Screen share. All right. So Juneteenth, which is officially called Juneteenth National Independence Day, and also known as Jubilee Day, Liberation Day, and Emancipation Day, is a federal holiday in the United States celebrating emancipation of African American slaves. Originating in Galveston, Texas in 1866, it has been celebrated annually on June 19th throughout the United States, and since 2021 as a federal holiday when President Joe Biden signed the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act into law. It is commemorated on the anniversary date of the June 19th, 1865 announcement of General Order No. 3 by Union Army General Gordon Granger, proclaiming freedom for slaves in Texas. President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation of 1862 had officially outlawed slavery in Texas and other states that had rebelled against the Union almost 2.5 years earlier. Enforcement of the proclamation generally relied on the advance of Union troops. Texas, as the most remote of the slave states that had seen an expansion of slavery and had a low presence of Union troops as the American Civil War ended, thus enforcement there had been slow and inconsistent prior to Granger's announcement. Although the Emancipation Proclamation declared an end to slavery in the Confederate States, slavery was still legal and practiced in two Union border states, Delaware and Kentucky, until December 6, 1865, when ratification of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution abolished chattel slavery nationwide. Additionally, Indian territories that had sided with the Confederacy, namely the Choctaw, were the last to release those enslaved in 1866. Celebrations date to 1866 at first involving church-centered community gatherings in Texas. It spread across the South and became more commercialized in the 1920s and 30s, often centering on a food festival. Participants in the Great Migration out of the South carried their celebrations to other parts of the country. During the civil rights movement of the 1960s, these celebrations were eclipsed by the struggle for post-war civil rights, but grew in popularity again in the 1970s with a focus on African American freedom and arts. As of 2021, North Dakota and South Dakota are the only states that do not recognize Juneteenth, according to the Congressional Research Service. Modern observance is primarily in local celebrations. Traditions include public readings of the Emancipation Proclamation, singing traditional songs such as Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and Lift Every Voice and Sing, and of works by noted African American writers such as Ralph Ellison and Maya Angelou. Celebrations include rodeos, street fairs, cookouts, family reunions, park parties, historical reenactments, and Miss Juneteenth contests. Juneteenth is also celebrated by the Mascogos, descendants of Black Seminoles who escaped from U.S. slavery in 1852 and settled in Coahuila, Mexico. History. The Civil War of Emancipation. During the American Civil War 1861 to 1865, emancipation came at different times to various places in the southern United States. Celebrations of emancipation, often called a jubilee, occurred on September 22nd, July 4th, August 1st, April 6th, and November 1st, among other dates. In Texas, emancipation came late, enforced in Texas on June 19th, 1865. As the Southern Rebellion collapsed, emancipation became a well-known cause of celebration. The end of slavery in Texas. President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on September 22, 1862. It became effective on January 1, 1863, declaring that all enslaved persons in the Confederate States of America in rebellion and not in Union hands were freed. More isolated geographically, planters and other slaveholders had migrated into Texas from eastern states to escape the fighting, and many brought enslaved people with them, increasing by the thousands the enslaved population in the state by the end of the Civil War. Although most lived in rural areas, more than 1,000 resided in both Galveston and Houston by 1860, with several hundred in other large towns. By 1865, there were an estimated 250,000 enslaved people in Texas. Despite the surrender of General Robert E. Lee at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9, 1865, the Western Army of the Trans-Mississippi did not surrender until June 2nd. On the morning of Monday, June 19, 1865, Union Major General Gordon Granger arrived on the island of Galveston, Texas. to take command of the more than 2,000 federal troops recently landed in the Department of Texas to enforce the emancipation of its slaves and oversee a peaceful transition of power, additionally nullifying all laws passed within the Texas during the war by Confederate. The Texas Historical Commission and Galveston Historical Foundation report that Rangers men marched throughout Galveston reading General Order Number 3, first at Union Army Headquarters at the Osterman Building, formerly at the intersection of Strand Street and since demolished, in the Strand Historic District. Next, they marched to the 1861 Customs House and Courthouse before finally marching to the Negro Church on Broadway, since renamed Reedy Chapel AME Church. The order informed all Texans that, in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves were free. The people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness, either there or elsewhere. Long-standing urban legend places the historic reading of Number 3 at Ashton Villa. However, no extant historical evidence supports such claims. On June 21st, 2014, the Galveston Historical Foundation and Texas Session erected a Juneteenth plaque where the Osterman Building once stood, signifying the location of Major General Granger's Union headquarters and subsequent issuance of his general orders. Although this event has come to be celebrated as the end of slavery, emancipation for the remaining enslaved in 2 Union border states, Delaware and Kentucky, would not come until several months later on December 18, 1865, when ratification of the 13th Amendment was announced. The freedom of formerly enslaved people in Texas was given final legal status in a series of Texas Supreme Court decisions between 1868 and 1874. Early celebrations. Formerly enslaved people in Galveston celebrated after the announcement. On June 19, 1866, 1 year after the announcement, freedmen in Texas organized the first of what became the annual celebration of Jubilee Day, Day of Jubilee. Early celebrations were used as political rallies to give voting instructions to newly freed slaves. Early independence celebrations often occurred on January 1st or 4th. In some cities, Black people were barred by Democrats from using public parks because of state-sponsored segregation of facilities. Across parts of Texas, freed people pooled their funds to purchase land to hold their celebrations. The day was first celebrated in Austin in 1867 under the auspices of the Freedmen's Bureau, and it had been listed on a calendar of public events by 1872. That year, Black leaders in Texas raised $1,000 for the purchase of 10 acres, 4 hectares, of land to celebrate Juneteenth, today known as Houston's Emancipation Park. The observation was soon drawing thousands of attendees across Texas. An estimated 30,000 Black people celebrated at Booker T. Washington Park in Limestone County, Texas, established in 1898 for Juneteenth celebrations. Attendance at the Limestone County event fell off sharply in the wake of the 1981 drowning of 3 local teenagers while in the custody of a Limestone County Sheriff's deputy, a reserve deputy, and a probation officer. By the 1890s, Jubilee Day had become known as Juneteenth. In the early 20th century, economic and political forces led to a decline in Juneteenth celebrations. From 1890 to 1908, Texas and all former Confederate states passed new constitutions or amendments that effectively disenfranchised Black people, excluding them from the political process. White-dominated state legislatures passed Jim Crow laws imposing second-class status. Gladys L. Knight writes, the decline in celebration was in part because upwardly mobile Blacks were ashamed of their slave past and aspired to assimilate into mainstream culture. Younger generations of Blacks becoming further removed from slavery were occupied with school and other pursuits. Others who migrated to the northern United States couldn't take time off or simply dropped the celebration. The Great Depression forced many Black people off farms and into the cities to find work. In these urban environments, African Americans had difficulty taking the day off to celebrate. From 1936 to 1951, the Texas State Fair served as a destination for celebrating the holiday, revival. In 1936, an estimated 150,000 to 200,000 people joined the holiday celebration in Dallas. In 1938, Texas Governor James V. Allred issued a proclamation stating in part, whereas the Negroes in the state of Texas observe June 19th as the official day for the celebration of emancipation from slavery, and whereas June 19th, 1865 was the date when General Robert S. Granger, who had command of the military district of Texas, issued a proclamation notifying the Negroes of Texas that they were free. And whereas since that time, Texas Negroes have observed this day with suitable holiday ceremony, except during such years when the day comes on a Sunday, when the governor of the state is asked to proclaim the following day as the holiday for state observance by Negroes. And whereas June 19, 1938, this year falls on Sunday, now therefore I, James V. Allred, governor of the state of Texas, do set aside and proclaim the day of June 20th, 1938 as the day for observance of Emancipation Day in Texas, and do urge all members of the Negro race in Texas to observe the day in a manner appropriate to its importance to them. 70,000 people attended a Juneteenth Jamboree in 1951. From 1940 through 1970, in the second wave of the Great Migration, more than 5 million Black people left Texas, Louisiana, and other parts of the South for the North and the West Coast. As historian Isabel Wilkerson writes, the people from Texas took Juneteenth Day to Los Angeles, Oakland, Seattle, and other places they went. In 1945, Juneteenth was introduced in San Francisco by an immigrant from Texas, Wesley Johnson. During the 1950s and 1960s, the civil rights movement focused the attention of African Americans on expanding freedom and integrating. As a result, observations of the holiday declined again, though it was still celebrated in Texas. It soon saw a revival as Black people began tying their struggle to that of ending slavery. In Atlanta, some campaigners for equality wore Juneteenth buttons. During the 1968 Poor People's Campaign to Washington, D.C., called by Reverend Ralph Abernathy, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference made June 19th the Solidarity Day of the Poor People's Campaign. In the subsequent revival, large celebrations in Minneapolis and Milwaukee emerged, as well as across the eastern United States. In 1974, Houston began holding large-scale celebrations again, and Fort Worth, Texas followed the next year. Around 30,000 people attended festivities at Sycamore Park in Fort Worth the following year. The 1978 Milwaukee celebration was described as drawing over 100,000 attendees. And let's see, prayer breakfast and commemorative celebration. In 1979, Democratic State Representative Al Edwards of Houston, Texas, successfully sponsored legislation to make Juneteenth a paid Texas state holiday. The same year, he hosted the inaugural Al Edwards Prayer Breakfast and Commemorative Celebration on the grounds of the 1859 home Ashton Villa. As one of the few existing buildings from the Civil War era and popular in local myth and legend as the location of Major General Granger's announcement, Edwards' annual celebration includes a local historian dressed as the Union General, reading General Order No. 3 from a second-story balcony of the home. The Emancipation Proclamation is also read and speeches are made. Representative Al Edwards died of natural causes April 29, 2020 at the age of 83, but the annual prayer breakfast and commemorative celebration continued at Ashton Villa, with the late legislator's son, Jason Edwards, speaking in his father's place. Official recognition. In the late 1970s, this legislature declared Juneteenth a holiday of significance, particularly to the Blacks of Texas. It became the first state to establish Juneteenth as a state holiday. The bill passed through the Texas legislature in 1979 and was officially made a state holiday on January 1st, 1980. Juneteenth is a partial staffing holiday in Texas. Government offices do not close, but agencies may operate with reduced staff, and employees may either celebrate this holiday or substitute it with one of 4 optional holidays recognized by Texas. In the late 1980s, there were major celebrations of Juneteenth in California, Wisconsin, Illinois, Georgia, and Washington, D.C. In 1996, the first legislation to recognize Juneteenth Independence Day was introduced in the U.S. House of Representatives, H.J. Resolution 195, sponsored by Barbara Rose Collins, Democrat from Michigan. In 1997, Congress recognized the day through Senate Joint Resolution 11 and House Joint Resolution 56. In 2013, the U.S. Senate passed Senate Resolution 75, acknowledging Lula Briggs Galloway, late president of the National Association of Juneteenth Lineage, who successfully worked to bring national recognition to Juneteenth Independence Day and the continued leadership of the National Juneteenth Observation Foundation. Activists have been pushing Congress to recognize Juneteenth as a federal holiday, and it now is. Organizations such as the National Juneteenth Observation Foundation sought a congressional designation of Juneteenth as a national day of observance. When it became a national holiday on June 17, 2021, it became one of the 5 date-specific federal holidays along with New Year's Day, Independence Day, Veterans Day, November 11th, and Christmas Day. Juneteenth will coincide with Father's Day in 2022, 2033, 2039, 2044, and 2050. In 2020, state governors of Virginia, New York, and New Jersey signed an executive order recognizing Juneteenth as a paid day of leave for state employees. In 2021, the governor of Oregon signed an executive order recognizing Juneteenth as a paid paid day of leave for state employees. On June 16, 2021, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker signed House Bill 3922, establishing Juneteenth as a paid state holiday starting in 2022. Since 2003, it had been a state ceremonial holiday in Illinois. Subsequent growth. Since the 1980s and 1990s, the holiday has been more widely celebrated among African American communities and has seen increasing mainstream attention in the U.S. In 1991, there was an exhibition by the Anacostia Museum, part of the Smithsonian Institution, called Juneteenth 91, Freedom Revisited. In 1994, a group of community leaders gathered at Christian Unity Baptist Church in New Orleans to work for greater national celebration of Juneteenth. Expatriates have celebrated it in cities abroad, such as Paris. Some U.S. military bases in other countries sponsor celebrations in addition to those of private groups. In 1999, Ralph Ellison's novel Juneteenth was published, increasing recognition of the holiday. By 2006, at least 200 cities celebrated the day. In 1997, activist Ben Hythe created the Juneteenth flag, which was further refined by illustrator Lisa Jean Graff. In 2000, the flag was first hoisted at the Roxbury Heritage State Park in Boston by Hythe. The Pan-African flag is also displayed during the holiday. So here's the Juneteenth flag. Beautiful. And here's the Pan-African flag. Beautiful. The holiday has gained mainstream awareness outside African American communities through depictions in entertainment media, such as episodes of TV series Atlanta and Blackish, the latter of which featured musical numbers about the holiday by Aloe Black, The Roots, and Farnsworth Bentley. In 2018, Apple added Juneteenth to its calendars in iOS under official U.S. holidays. In 2021, several American corporations and educational institutions, including Twitter, the National Football League, Nike, announced that they would treat Juneteenth as a company holiday, providing a paid day off to their workers. And Google Calendar added Juneteenth to its U.S. holidays calendar. Also in 2020, a number of major universities formally recognized Juneteenth either as a day of reflection or as a university holiday with paid time off for faculty and staff. In 2020, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic and worldwide protests sparked by the police killing of George Floyd, controversy ensued when President Donald Trump scheduled his first political rally since the pandemic's outbreak for Juneteenth in Tulsa, Oklahoma, site of the 1921 race massacre in the Greenwood District. In response, he rescheduled the rally for the following day. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, Trump said, "I did something good. I made Juneteenth very famous. It's actually an important event, an important time, but nobody had ever heard of it until I mentioned it." Oh, he is so full of shit. I hate him. Trump is a disgusting pig. Okay, calls for further recognition. Whoops. National. Juneteenth is a federal holiday in the United States. On June 15th, 2021, just a few days ago, 2 days ago, as a matter of fact, the Senate unanimously passed the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act, establishing Juneteenth as a federal holiday. It subsequently passed through the House of Representatives by a 415 to 14 vote on June 16th. Whoever those 14 people were in the House of Representatives that didn't vote for this can kiss our asses. President Joe Biden signed the bill on June 17, 2021, making Juneteenth the 11th federal holiday. And I bet those 14th are racist. Other. Most states recognize it in some way, either as a ceremonial observance or a state holiday. Texas was the first state to recognize the date in 1980. By 2002, 8 states officially recognized Juneteenth, and 4 years later, 15 states recognized the holiday. By 2008, nearly half of states observed the holiday as a ceremonial observance. All right. So that's a little bit of history of Juneteenth. I hope you enjoyed that. Now we're going to go to Black Agenda Report article called Freedom Ride, How to Not Celebrate Juneteenth. Okay, wait, I gotta take that one off. And okay, now go back to screen sharing. Excuse me a little. Here we go. Black Agenda Report. Here we go. Freedom Ride, how not to celebrate Juneteenth. Excellent. By by Margaret Kimberly, Black Agenda Report senior columnist, on 16 June 2021. Juneteenth Freedom Day. Juneteenth has become the late iteration of liberal capture of Black politics, virtue signaling, and the intentional misrepresentation of America's history. An opportunity to discuss resistance against oppression has been turned into a substance-free, feel-good day. Juneteenth was largely a regional holiday celebrated by Black people in Texas and other southern states. It commemorates the events of June 19, 1865, when Union troops arrived in Galveston and announced that slavery ended as per General Order No. 3. The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. It is an important event that ought to be remembered, but its true significance has been lost. Juneteenth has become the latest iteration of liberal capture of Black politics, opportunistic virtue signaling, and the intentional misrepresentation of America's history. And this is something that we have to watch out for, you guys, because there are too many companies who are taking advantage of Juneteenth. So we need to get back to what the original intention of Juneteenth was. And maybe Margaret Kelly can tell us how to do that. Corrupt and avaricious corporations honor Juneteenth, and cynical politicians give it great attention. There are calls to make it an official federal holiday, been done. Unfortunately, the most common narratives of the Civil War are fraught with lies meant to give dispensation to bad actors of that area and to sanitize awful truths. Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation went into effect on January 1st, 1863, and is one of the most misunderstood documents in history. Lincoln was far from the great emancipator of the American imagination. In the early days of the war, he ordered that enslaved people who escaped to Union lines be returned to their slaveholders. His goal was to accommodate the Southern states as much as possible and keep them and their peculiar institution in the Union. Only rebel intransigence and the determination of the enslaved to be free changed his plans. Lincoln wanted to prevent slaveholding states Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri from seceding. That is why the proclamation freed only those people located in states that had already seceded. That is to say, under Confederate control, which made it practically meaningless as a tool of emancipation. The proclamation also exempted those areas of the Confederacy which were already under Union control. He insisted also that the little emancipation that he offered to be tied to colonization, the relocation of Black people outside of the country. It is rarely mentioned that he signed such a colonization plan on December 31st, 1862, the day before signing the Emancipation Proclamation. A group of 500 contrabands were sent to Ile La Vache, a small island off the coast of Haiti, in 1863. They were ravaged by hunger and disease, and only 365 survived when they were rescued in 1865. 2 years? My goodness. They were ravaged by hunger and disease, and only 365 survived. Ugh. The insistence on continuing this pro-Lincoln mythology has turned the Juneteenth story into a nonsensical fairy tale. We are told that enslaved people didn't know the war had ended and didn't know why they should have been freed until the Union Army arrived in Texas. Of course, Texans of all races knew that Robert E. Lee surrendered his armies in April 1865, and they knew that Lincoln was assassinated shortly thereafter. They had newspapers and the telegraph and letters from those who left the battlefield. Enslaved people were aware of anything that white people knew. They overheard conversations and saw white soldiers returning home. Some were on the battlefield as laborers in the Confederate Army. The official announcement only confirmed what they already knew. The explanation of the late announcement is very simple. Texas is further west and was off the beaten path of the Union Army. It took them 2 months to establish their victory and send troops to Confederate hinterlands. It is also not surprising that the slaveholders wouldn't free anyone until they absolutely had to. There was no one able to enforce Lincoln's two-year-old decree, and they simply went about business as usual, squeezing the last ounce of forced labor out of their human chattel while they had the chance. Juneteenth is an opportunity to tell the history of the enslaved people who freed themselves when they could and joined the army to form the United States Colored Troops. The untold importance of the Emancipation Proclamation is that it established the right of escaped people to join the army. Frederick Douglass and others pleaded with Lincoln for 2 years to arm the people who had the greatest stake in the outcome of the war. Juneteenth is an opportunity to debunk and demystify. Any effort to make Juneteenth a national holiday should be viewed with caution. Such a designation would only continue the telling of false tales. It would allow the bad actors of the present day to get away with cheap theatrics while continuing the legal and economic structures which still oppress Black people. The true story of the past would be kept hidden, and the story of the present would be sugar-coated. Juneteenth was a big event in the segregated South, a people's holiday. That is how it should remain. Corporations which work against the people's interests should not be allowed to absolve themselves by engaging in performative acts. Politicians who aid them at every turn should not be permitted to utter Juneteenth platitudes and create a new public relations farce. An opportunity to discuss resistance against oppression has been turned into a substance-free, feel-good day. Black people don't need governmental or corporate acknowledgement in order to tell their stories. In fact, learning history for our own sake is of paramount importance. Juneteenth can be the starting point for further study. Let Juneteenth remain a commemoration with significance for ourselves. Doing otherwise inevitably leads to confusion. Margaret Kimberly's Freedom Writer column appears weekly in Black Agenda Report and is widely reprinted elsewhere. She maintains a frequently updated blog as well at http://freedomwriter.blogspot.com. Ms. Kimberly lives in New York City and can be reached via email at margaret.kimberly@blackagendareport.com. Well, that was a very powerful article written by the lovely, oh, I forgot to screen share it for you guys. I am so sorry. I thought that I did. Here is that article. I am so sorry. I thought that I had shared it up there for you guys to see it. So I would suggest that everyone go read daily Black Agenda Report. This is a wonderful group of Black journalists that helps us to understand Black history and the plight of Black people today. There is also the Black Star News, which I'm going to be sharing with you right now. And be sure to, there is a chat function here on Restream. If you want to chat with me, please do. And also support my Patreon at the patreon.com. The future is socialist. All right, we're going to stop screen sharing for now. And let's talk a little bit about what excuse me, my brain, what Miss Margaret Kimberly is saying about Juneteenth. It is important, very, very important, that Black folks have their own holiday, own commemoration day, since they were the only people enslaved in the United States, kept on being enslaved, that kept long after we knew that it was a bad thing. So we need to protect our Black brothers and sisters, and we need to hold up their voices. We need to talk, listen to what they have to say, especially this Juneteenth. If you're going to celebrate, great. If not, okay too. But at least read something from a famous Black author. You got Frederick Douglass. You've got poetry, Langston Hughes. You've got Maya Angelou. You've got Ibrahim Kendi. You've got all kinds of Black writers you can look up to. Okay, so now we're going to look at Black Star News. After making Juneteenth a holiday, Congress must address racial injustice. All right, so let me verify that you guys can see this. Okay, so now you can see this. Okay, after making Juneteenth a holiday, Congress must address racial injustice. Today, President Joe Biden signed a bill that will make Juneteenth a federal holiday. Following the bill signing, Nicole Lee Indumele Vice President for Racial Equity, and I apologize if I didn't say her last name correctly, Vice President for Racial Equity and Justice at the Center for American Progress, issued the following statement. Today, 156 years after some of the last Black Americans to be held in bondage in the United States were given word of their freedom, America finally has a designated day to acknowledge and commemorate the end of slavery. But since slavery in the United States officially ended in 1865, a century and a half of deliberate policy choices and structural inequalities have perpetuated racial inequities in virtually every facet of American life. Commemorating and telling the story of Juneteenth is an important step in understanding the country's deeply entrenched racial injustices, but it cannot take the place of concrete and meaningful reforms needed to address the present-day inequities that Black Americans confront every day. Congress must now turn its attention to passing tangible policy legislation such as the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, the For the People Act, the American Jobs Plan, and the American Families Plan. Together, these bills and others that center racial justice would address systemic racism and criminal justice, democracy, and economic opportunity for Black Americans. For more than 400 years, American policy has stood in the way of racial equity. We now have the opportunity to build a new, more just country, but only if Congress acts. And it's not actually all of Congress that we have to worry about with this, with these acts. We need to put political pressure on Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, the For the People Act, which is a great one. We will discuss the For the People Act one day. Also, the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan. I will make a note to make those Patreon. So if you'd like to find out more videos that I do, you can join me on Patreon. So please join my Patreon page and let me know in any comments on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. Let me know what you liked about this show, what you didn't like, if I missed something, if I didn't miss something. I'm a new show. I'm just actually restarting. I started the show back in April, but then I had a really bad health setback that was for about a month and a half. So I didn't make any videos. But now I'm feeling better. I'm back. I'm working on a series of videos that will be uploaded to Patreon. I'm also working on finding a co-host. And also I would like to interview some people on the show. So if you want to be interviewed, please contact me at Emberlea, EMBERLEA at protonmail.com. Okay? My email address again is Emberlea, EMBERLEA at proton, PROTON, mail, MAIL.com. Emberlea at protonmail.com. Thank you guys. I really appreciate you listening to my special on Juneteenth. I hope that you learned something. I know that I certainly did learn a few things that I didn't know. And let's not let the national observation of Juneteenth keep us from really understanding what Juneteenth is about. And it's about our Black brothers and sisters lifting up their voices, helping to get some of these policies enacted that we need to get enacted to help people, especially Black people. Okay? So there you go. Help any Black person you can. Okay? Thank you very much for listening today. Thank you. I appreciate you. But please don't forget patreon.com/thefuturistsocialist. Thank you so much. See you on Monday.